Doctor, our today's discussion will be on different thematic areas of Dr. Phillips' expertise, like just like we will be talking on diplomatic communication in hostile information ecosystem, strategic thinking and behaviors in the age of both trolls and um, uh, these sort of things. In this lecture, we do have Dr. Philip. We have different diplomats in our class from different countries, and I welcome on behalf of all my class fellows. There are diplomats from Kenya, Nigeria, Somalia, Saudi Arabia, uh, Egypt, and Pakistan, and we do have also some experts. They will be joining on later stage, so we can start formally if you are convenient.
I'm sorry. So are we good to get going?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you might be located. It's quite early here in the United States, so I hope everyone is having a good day wherever you might be. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, my name is Dr. Philip Arsenault. I'm a professor in the United States at Miami University. And I specialize in communications specific to basically the political realm, but particularly the international realm. So I deal a lot in international relations, international law, and diplomacy. So let me share my screen and we can get started on this lecture. Awesome. Can everybody see my PowerPoint? Thumbs up.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Awesome. So again, as I mentioned, this lecture is entitled "Diplomatic Communications and Hostile Information Ecosystems: Strategic Thinking and Behavior in the Age of Bots, Trolls, and Malign Actors." Really, what I really want to talk about, or just kind of get you thinking about, is what is good, effective communication as a diplomat? How are you fulfilling your role as a diplomat to communicate to other countries and foreign populations and foreign audiences on behalf of your government? But then also thinking about, in today's very complex and technological information environment, how do other people try and steal that or interfere in that process from you or what you're trying to achieve? So that's really, there's a lot of big fancy words in here, but really that's what we're getting at. What is effective communication from a diplomatic standpoint, and how are different actors trying to interfere in that process? So again, just about myself. Again, my name is Dr. Philip Arsenault. I teach here in the United States at Miami University. This is my Twitter handle. In case we have any people who are very Twitter happy, you're more than welcome to kind of, tweet about this or talk about it or share about it. And again, my areas of expertise, I look at the area of political public relations. So how do we look at public relations? And again, in political context, public diplomacy, how do nations try and manage their image in the international arena? And then other areas is international law, technology policy, and cybersecurity. And as we're going through, you're going to kind of see how a lot of those all gel into one kind of ball of wax, which is what we're going to be getting about today. So just for the agenda, to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be going through, the first section, we're going to talk about what is strategic communication? What does it mean to think about strategic communication holistically as a diplomat? What about the bad actors, right? Not only is it hard enough to do effective communication, but what about actors out there that are going to try and interfere in this message? Other countries, hostile countries, malign actors, such, not necessarily terrorist groups, but other actors who are going to try and steal the message, interfere in your narrative that you're trying to tell. What are strategies for deterrence, right? How can we try and stop some of these actors and hold on and keep control of our own message? And then thinking about this from a public policy standpoint, right? What are policies at a legislative level that can help some of these policies for deterrence? And then we'll kind of wrap up with a question and answer session. So that's what I have for the agenda. And so to get started, very basically, what is this idea of strategic communication? Primarily in the United States, we break this down into three areas. This could be public relations, advertising, or marketing, but they all come together with this idea of it's communication for a purpose, right? We don't just, as diplomats, we don't just, kind of say, oh, I'm doing this for, I want to talk about whatever. There's always a purpose to it. We're always trying to achieve something. So communication with a purpose is a very simplistic definition. A more complex definition is this idea of it is purposeful and planned communication, emphasis on both. There's a purpose to it, but there's also planned. It's not something we do haphazardly. You should sit down and think out a strategy, right? That's why we call it strategic communication. Think about the long-term goals that you're trying to achieve and the long-term strategies that can help you try and get there. Purposeful and planned communication that deliberately seeks to manage the information environment in ways that facilitate outputs and outcomes that are beneficial to your organization. Basically, you want something, there's something specific you want to achieve. What are the long-term strategies you think and plan about and enact to achieve it? And then are you moving closer toward your outcome? Are you achieving the goals your diplomatic mission is setting out to achieve? So breaking this down, right? It is purposeful. It is something we intentionally, it is deliberative. We seek out to do it. It's not something that will naturally happen on its own if we don't, as diplomats, try to make sure that it happens or ensure that it happens. It needs to be planned. Again, it's something you should think out over time and think about strategically. Who are the audiences you're trying to reach? What kind of messages are you trying to achieve? What are your goals, right? Not every country, not every foreign ministry will have the same goals. Not every embassy or consulate that is part of a same ministry will have the exact same goals and outcomes. So you have to think about these things for yourself as an individual diplomat, as a member of your specific diplomatic mission, and then more broadly as a representative of your foreign ministry, and then the country more broadly, again, that you're representing. All of these groups have goals, specific outcomes they're seeking, and how do they fall in line with where you're serving, where you're stationed and where you're serving. All of this comes down to the most core and fundamental thing we want to think about in terms of strategic communication is managing that information environment, right? Setting a narrative, telling a story about that the public will believe or buy about your country, your mission, your diplomatic mission. And this boils down to three key areas you want to think about. How are you managing public image? The image of your country, the image of your foreign ministry, or the image of your specific diplomatic mission, right? An embassy, a consulate, anything of that nature. How do you manage public reputation? So not just how the public sees you, but how the public thinks about you over the long term, right? Do you have a positive reputation? Does your country have a positive reputation? Does it have a mixed reputation or does it have a poor reputation? Those are the things you want to think about. It's not just the day-to-day image, it's the long-term image that they also see. How can you improve that and make that a positive image for your country? And then also managing public expectations. And this comes down to the idea of if the international community, if a host country that your diplomatic mission has very high expectations, but you struggle to meet those very high expectations, it looks poorly on your mission because you're struggling to meet them. So you want to make sure that the way the level that the public expects from your mission or your country in terms of performance or international engagement meets their ability, right? The resources, the time management, the fiscal resources that your country or mission has in order to be able to perform, right? So manage image, manage reputation, and manage expectations. Those are the three kind of really key fundamental areas you want to think about, philosophically or holistically as you plan out your effective diplomatic communications. Then you want to think about the outputs, right? There's a difference between outputs and outcomes. And very often these tend to kind of get a little bit confused or overlapped. Outputs are what you produce, right? The things that your diplomatic mission will produce: press releases, feature stories, fact sheets, the things that are actually written down, or whether they're print or broadcast or digital, right? If any of your missions have, social media accounts, a WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, any of these things, what kind of content are they putting out there? That's an output. They're the things that your mission will actually do and produce: speeches, public engagements, anything like that. And then outcomes are the desired goals. Are you achieving the thing that you want to achieve, right? And this is going to vary widely across different missions in different countries, different foreign ministries. Maybe your diplomatic mission to one country is very interested in your receiving country's tech sector, right? So you want to engage primarily with their tech sector to establish international business treaties that, you have good cooperation among your technology sectors. Other countries or other missions that might be agriculture or, all kinds of different areas, right? These will be relative. And so what you're doing, are you achieving your specific outcomes and your goals? Are you engaging with the tech sector, for that example? Are you not only, you're trying to speak with them, but are you having fluid dialogue with them? Are you achieving any sort of progress on making, establishing international regulations or treaties or relationships between your private sectors about establishing those things? So this is what, breaking that definition down, these are the things you want to be thinking about very broadly and consistently. This is a very regular basis. You want to be thinking about these things, and are you moving closer towards them? More broadly, we call this area public diplomacy. in the academia, the world that I come from largely, we refer to this as public diplomacy. It is also referred as public diplomacy in many of the diplomatic sectors, at least in the United States and Europe. There might be different terms in different parts of the world, Central Asia, Africa, South America. But it's all idea of strategic communication in the service of your country. How are you speaking to other countries and other foreign audiences, foreign publics, foreign citizens on behalf of your country? And this, again, varies broadly, right? There's different ideas about what is public diplomacy in the United States, what is public diplomacy in Russia, in China, in India, different countries in Africa, right? In Turkey. It will never look the same for everyone. And so that's one important thing to understand is I can sit here and give you this lecture about all the things you need to think about. And hopefully some things will be useful to you, but not all of these things will be identical for all of you, depending on what missions you're at, what countries you represent. Everything will have to be fit, designed or made unique a little bit to fit your specific interest, the goals that you're trying to achieve as an individual diplomat, as a representative of your mission, or as a representative of your foreign ministry and country more broadly. So what you want to think about in terms of effective strategic communication, you, and I say this either individually or as a part of your mission, you want to have very clear goals about what you want to achieve. What is your mission most responsible or most interested in doing? And again, this might be if your diplomatic mission is in a receiving country that is a tech powerhouse, right? In your region of the world. You might be, again, more interested in that technology sector, right? So you're not just trying to engage with every single foreigner in that country, right? To say, hi, my country is a good country. This is why you should be interested in, working with it or partnering with it or traveling to it. We do not have the time or resources, right? You cannot communicate with everybody. And it's you think about cost benefit, right? You can spend all the time and money trying to engage with, an entire country, and it's not going to be effective. So you want to think about strategically managing your audiences or your stakeholders that you want to really impact, that you really want to connect with and develop meaningful relationships. So what is your goal? What do you want to achieve? Is it bringing in tourism, right? Getting people from this country to come to visit your country, promoting tourism? Is it promoting agriculture? Is it promoting scientific research, pharmaceutical relationships, health, any kind of sector, right? This could be, what is that? And then let that specific outcome, that thing that you want to achieve, let that drive the rest of your strategy, right? Whatever your outcome is, those stakeholders should be your key audiences, right? Don't try and, communicate with everyone in a foreign country, because again, you're not going to be overly successful. You need to specialize your efforts. So think about, if you want to communicate with the tech sector in a specific country, yes, you're going to have your daily communications where you're working on, representing your country to the general public and other groups. But on the whole, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing certain time and certain resources to try and really reach out to host, receptions where you're getting members of that tech sector to come, that you're producing press releases or other, professional communications that are talking about your country's interest in working with this country's tech sector. Make sure that you specifically hone them out and target your messages to catch their attention and build relationships that, benefit your country and your diplomatic mission. Let who your audiences are drive the platform selection. So if you're really trying to work in tourism and you want to develop tourism between your sending country and your receiving country, and you want to get young people to travel, right? You're particularly trying to get younger people or, maybe people of a certain class that have the financial resources to travel. That's going to be very different of platform selection than trying to communicate with the tech sector, right? Different age groups, different kind of modes of communication. You shouldn't be using the exact same platforms, right? If you're going to try and communicate with younger people, you want to maybe try and emphasize social media platforms, right? That's a little bit more where younger people are and they're more actively engaged. So engage with them that way. If you're trying to reach out to maybe, the tech sector, or the pharmaceutical sector, or, major business or governmental sectors, that's not exactly what you would think about. You might use more traditional forms like press releases or professional diplomatic channels of that nature. So think about that. What is your outcome? Who do you most need to reach to achieve that outcome? And what platforms are going to be most effective for reaching that kind of public, that kind of audience? And then let that platform, that the platforms, not just one, but it could be plural, let that dictate your content strategy, how you create content. Content's going to look very different on a social media platform. If you have a Twitter account or a Facebook or a WhatsApp channel or WeChat or anything, that's going to look very different than writing a traditional press release or writing a speech that's going to be given by maybe your foreign minister in some sort of reception. They're going to be written very different. And so that's, again, you want to think about, these should not all be one message that you write that goes out everywhere. Think about how you can curtail it to fit specific platforms that are driven by specific audiences. So it's a long process, and this comes down to thinking about this strategically, right? The long-term strategies to be effective as diplomats and as communicators for your again, mission and your country. You always want to be thinking about these things on the regular, but you also want to think about, are you being effective, right? You can produce all of these kind of different campaigns. You can produce videos, have diplomats or your foreign minister out giving regular speeches or attending social functions or things. But is it actually being effective? Is it helping you achieve the thing that you want? And so you always want to think about measuring your effectiveness, right? And this can look very different. Yes, I conduct research, but my kind of research will be maybe different from what you're kind of trying to achieve here. But think about, how can you measure your effectiveness? If you're putting out social media posts, you want to think about, are we getting lots of likes? Are we getting lots of mentions, retweets, or reshares? What are the metrics you can use to try and measure effectiveness? That way you can determine, if you're putting a lot of time, effort, and resources into one particular strategy, and you determine it's not your metrics or your evaluations telling you you're not being overly successful in that mode, that's perfectly fine. Change things up. You should always be fluid and able to kind of rotate out and change your strategy to what's going to be more or most effective. And that's where research and evaluation helps you to make those determinations, is to think about those things. Are we being successful? No. Okay, how can we change it? Is it a major change? Is it a minor change? Is it a little tweak? Those kinds of things. So that's what effective strategic communication is. It's thinking about all these things and thinking about them on a regular basis. Part of what helps you engage in that measurement and evaluation is thinking about these three things: social listening, media monitoring, and environmental scanning. And these are very similar concepts that very often get overlapped, but they are unique. And so what do I mean by these? Social listening is where it's keeping tabs on what your key audience is, your key stakeholders, again, those people you most want to interact with or engage with. What are they thinking about you, right? And this is mostly relative towards social networking platforms, right? If you, again, have a Twitter account, a Facebook, WeChat, WhatsApp, TikTok, anything that's Snapchat, anything that's out there right now, what are they talking about you? You want to know what they're mentioning. How are they speaking positively about you? Are they even mentioning you at all? Are you getting any kind of traction? Looking at platforms and understanding, how are they talking about you and what they're saying? Media monitoring comes back to the traditional news media. How are you being covered and referenced in the major news media? And this is going to be news media in your receiving country, news media in your sending country, and then also global, international news media, right? Major news media, maybe in the United States or Europe, or regional news media in wherever you might be stationed, Central Asia, Africa, South America. How are they speaking about you? Again, this is when we talk about earned media, how people talk about you without, what your behavior deserves or earns. What are they talking about you? If you think you're doing a good job, but the news media is not speaking very well about you, you want to try and be aware of that, because that's going to impact how the public, who gets a lot of their news and information from the major news media, will be seeing you, right? Your image, your reputation, and the expectations. So you want to know what they're always saying about you. So keep tabs of your own networks, keep tabs of the mass media. And then most broadly, you also want to think about environmental scanning. And this is basically just trying to understand what opportunities are coming up. What are the things you can expect, right? We all know in the diplomatic world, things change very fast. There's always crises that are coming up. Things are changing. And we just need to be aware of them. You don't always have to act on every single one of them. Lord knows, there's not enough time if you responded to every single thing that was out there. But you want to know, are there opportunities coming up that you might not have noticed otherwise? How can you utilize them? How can you capitalize on them? Or if there are looming crises that you see on the horizon, right? How can you prepare for them in advance, right? Again, strategies about long-term thinking. How can you prepare if you think, this might be coming? No one saw the COVID pandemic coming, right? That was something no one saw. But other crises that, take time to develop, right? Months or weeks. And if you see that coming, you can prepare your strategy. How is your mission going to react? How is your mission going to respond to something in a specific country? And so these are all things you want to be thinking about, right? Your specific networks, your audiences and stakeholders for social listening, media monitoring for what earned media is your diplomatic mission or your host country, or your country receiving in the, again, regional, local, regional, or international news media. And then environmental scanning. This is just trying to look everywhere, keeping your ears to the ground so you can just understand what things are coming up, what things are going to come up that are unexpected. Good things or bad things, crises. So again, you want to think about all of these things. And I understand this is a lot to think about, right? All of these different things, image, reputation, expectations, research, all these things. It's a lot to think about. It's not something you have to worry about every single day. It's just you want to try and get in the regular behavior of thinking about these things more holistically. You want to understand the broad picture of how your diplomatic mission needs to communicate with the world, right? With its receiving country, with its sending country, with the broader international community. And to do that, you need to understand the broader picture. What's going on in international politics? What's going on in regional politics? What's going on in local politics? All these things will impact your ability to perform as diplomats. And so you just want to be aware of things that are going on. Do the best you can. We all have limited time. We have limited financial resources. You can't devote to this 100% all the time, but just thinking about it to what extent you can. So the next couple of slides are just some screenshots of platforms you can utilize for social listening, environmental scanning, or media monitoring. I reached out to some of my colleagues who work in the international communication sector, not necessarily diplomacy or international relations. They're more international public relations practitioners or communication experts. But these are the platforms they use to engage in these measurement and evaluation measures. This one is called Notified. A colleague of mine, I believe, was stationed or is out of Barbados. This is her preferred platform that she chooses to use. Another one is called Media Toolkit. It's pretty good this one's particularly good for media monitoring and environmental scanning. Basically, what are people talking about your mission, your country, your brand? How is that being reflected? And then another one is called Nuvi, N-U-V-I. This one is a lot more customizable, where you can basically tell the software what you want it to look for. And from there, it'll provide you regular updates. And the nice thing is that all these platforms are automated. You just tell it when you set it up what you want, and then it will send you daily updates, right? So you don't have to worry about checking this multiple times a day or all the day. They will send you daily updates to give you all this information. How many times have you been referenced in the last 24 hours? Are they positive or negative? How have they been picked up in the news media, right? This whole system is automated. So it's a nice way to, if you're interested in getting engaged with this environmental or social listening, media monitoring, and environmental scanning, these are some platforms that are good options to at least get started with. Something I will say, recognizing that, many of you are in, Central Asia, Africa, and I believe I was also told a few from South America. I don't know how these perform specifically for your regions. These are developed, and I reached out specifically to my international colleagues who do this, at a broader scale. These perform very well in prominent languages, so English, probably French, German, Mandarin, Arabic. But I don't know how these are going to perform on more regional languages that are not as broadly translated in the technology sector and code writing. So these are just ideas to throw out there to maybe get you started if you're interested. See how they might play out in certain parts of the world, depending on the languages and dialects that are relative to your region that you're serving in. And look around, right? If maybe these aren't the best for your region, there's a lot more out there. These are just some of the primary ones my international PR colleagues prefer or think are some of the best. So this is not easy, right? Managing expectations, managing image and reputation and expectations. It's not easy. Any of you who as diplomats, this is not an easy thing. It's something you have to do every day, all day, and you're continuously struggling to win the narrative battle, convince people how to think about your country or your foreign ministry or specific diplomatic mission. It's not easy at all. There's always crises looming, right? There's always crises out there that impact your ability to be effective as communicators, to be effective communicators as diplomats. And just some things to think about that we've seen recently, right? Kind of going through these different pictures, right? As as an American living in the United States, we have all of these recent race, we have all of these race and gender issues, right? These protests in the United States. As the United States, very fondly likes to tout its interest and defense of humanitarian rights, it's really hard as a U.S. diplomat to try and advocate for humanitarian rights in other parts of the world when at home we have all of these race issues going on. We have this violence, in our own backyard. It really undercuts the effectiveness of U.S. diplomats to advocate for humanitarian rights elsewhere when we can't enforce it or live it out in our own country. It cuts at the credibility and authenticity of our diplomats, right? It undercuts their effectiveness. The Khashoggi death of the journalist from Saudi Arabia, not even implicating who was involved or responsible, but think about the kind of international news coverage and image that reflected upon Saudi Arabia, but also the Crown Prince, right? It was largely assumed that he was involved with this. All of the international and diplomatic furlough that this threw up around this killing, right? Or the death of Khashoggi. More recently, we've seen the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, I believe, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Russia, right? These are domestic issues that are receiving major international attention. People are talking about these countries and these events. And it becomes your responsibility as a diplomat stationed abroad or a civil servant to try and still figure out, how can I be effective in my role when all of these other crises are stealing the stage, right? This is what people want to talk about, not the specific things my mission is trying to achieve. Or more recently in Israel, the corruption scandal and trial against Benjamin Netanyahu, that impacts the effectiveness of Israeli diplomats, or in the Russia case, Russian diplomats or Saudi diplomats. Other examples in Belarus, right? We have all of these protests about Lukashenko, rigging the election and, all these different issues. Mass protests undercut the effectiveness of Belarusian diplomats to be effective abroad, right? How can they advance the interests of their country when their country is, tearing itself apart, right, in these protests? These are the things we can't control. You can't control crises, whether abroad or in your country, and they very much impact your ability to be an effective communicator. So that's when understanding these things might be looming. How can you tweak your communication strategy or your message strategy to try and subvert these issues, or can stay on message, continue your effectiveness about what you're trying to achieve with your specific mission? Also for South America, we've seen in recent years, mass protests, the instability in Venezuela, the president in Brazil. We've seen lots of other issues in Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, right? All these protests undercut the effectiveness and credibility of diplomats in all of these countries to be effective, right? They're from all the way down from the foreign minister down to all of the foreign and civil servants, right, in these missions. These are issues that you have to see coming as much as possible and try and account for them. Develop strategies where you can still be an effective communicator. And even in the Middle East, right, you can't always see it coming, which is the difficult part. All these issues that have happened in Lebanon, right, since that explosion on harbor of their grain distillery. We've seen mass riots, right? We've seen mass riots. We've seen basically the destabilization of the government in Lebanon, right? And they're trying to figure out how to move forward, and they're stuck in a rut. They're struggling. So how do you, as a diplomat, as a Lebanese diplomat, how do you advocate to a foreign country that, you do business with us, travel to our country, right? Let's have a good relationship. When the world just sees this hot mess of, of an unstable government, of impending regime change, how do you achieve that? It's incredibly hard, and it's not easy. Some things you can see coming. Some of these issues, race relations have been very rough in the United States for a number of years. You could maybe kind of see these things coming a little bit, but in the case of like Lebanon, that explosion radically changed everything. And so sometimes you have drastic change of a crisis, and sometimes they're gradual, but there's still crises that we have to try and understand and still figure out how to be effective diplomats and communicators while these things are going on, or until they resolve themselves. So again, being an effective communicator, it's not easy, right? It is an extensively difficult job. And that's assuming no one is trying to interfere with you, right? So now we're going to shift a little bit to talking about bad actors, right? It's really difficult to maintain a positive image, reputation, and expectation for your country on a normal basis. But now we also know you have competitor, some of your foreign countries that you're friendly with, their diplomatic missions will try and interfere with your message. On top of that, we increasingly see, what we call malign actors, right? Online, they're using the internet to try and steal the message, right? To to cause social disruption, to interfere with your ability, countries' abilities to be effective, right? And they're not targeting diplomatic, embassies or diplomats specifically, but they definitely have repercussions on the diplomatic process. How can you be effective with one country, with your relationship with another country? And there are many different names that this goes by. This could be fake news. This could be disinformation or misinformation. In a more military or strategic context, they're often called influence operations from one country into another. And more broadly, the kind of one of the new buzzwords that we see that are kind of starting to show up in research, but then also some certain levels of policy making, is we refer to as computational propaganda. This very core idea of propaganda, but how is it being played out on the internet, right? How are the ability to use algorithms and content behavioral profiling and psychographic marketing, right? How are these things being facilitated to allow this on the internet? So this idea of computational propaganda, it's basically that, again, how do we use algorithms to automate this process of messaging, right? How do we use one person? How can one person operate 100 different bot accounts on a specific platform, right? How do you create messages? How do you curtail messages to specific audiences, right? How do you try and sow social division, right? You create certain bots that buy advertisements, right? Or promoted content on the internet, right? Whether it's a search engine, a social media platform, anything like that. How do you do this? How do you interfere in kind of the social fabric of a society using content, right? This is what computational propaganda gets at. It involves learning and mimicking from real people. So, bots are only effective when if we recognize they're bots in our own social networks, right? We're like, okay, you ignore them or you block them. That problem is they are increasingly getting effective at looking like real people, authentic behavior or authentic content. This is a process of understanding how to make this content better, but they're getting better and better because of things like artificial intelligence, right? Things that, governments are actively pursuing in today's, information and technology environment. Countries are, in an arms race to try and be the first ones to achieve effective artificial intelligence and implement it. Well, there are some good uses for that, but there's also some bad uses. And one is it can make things like these bots and trolls so much more authentic, it makes it more difficult to identify them as non-authentic, right? As not real people. And so there is this the kind of the leaders in this area. There's a research group at University of Oxford in the UK. They're in the Oxford Internet Institute, and they're just the computational propaganda research project, and they're doing a lot of the groundbreaking work in this area. And one thing I'll say that I'll also mention later is they, unfortunately, like many other areas of research, a lot of our foreground ideas and understanding what's happening is based on the West, right? It's based on the United States. It's based on countries like Europe and France and Germany and, Central and in Western Europe. We don't know enough about computational propaganda in places like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Kenya, right? We need more. And so these groups are actively looking to try and collaborate and work with you. So, if you're interested in this, right, feel more than welcome to, if your diplomatic mission is interested, or your foreign ministry, they work hand in hand with foreign ministries and specific, embassies or consulates on these areas. So it's not that, there's this thing going out and, you're on your own to deal with it. There's a lot of different governments, international organizations, think tanks, the private sector, right? They're all working on this. And the more we work together is the best way that we can, move forward in this area, this new era of, computational propaganda. And I'm going to get back to more of that a little bit later in the PowerPoint, but just understand these are things that we're actively working on. And so what kind of ways do we see these issues manifest themselves, right? Computational propaganda can be applied in a lot of different contexts. One of them is diplomatic interference, right? And for, the majority of you as practicing diplomats, this is exactly how it's going to impact you. Recently we saw Prime Minister Modi from India visited to China to meet with Chairman Xi. And there was this hashtag that started trending on the major social networking platforms of "Go Back Modi." To go back to India and trying to instill this continuation of hostilities or lack of real goodwill between China and India. So the issue is, not only did this start trending in India, but the issue was this bots started pushing this content from Pakistan. When you do research on these and you scrape this data, you can also understand geotagging. There were this was tweeted over 12,000 times by bot accounts out of Pakistan, right? That received over 80,000 likes and retweets. So, right, Pakistan, who's unrelated in this relationship between India and China, right? Computational or bots and trolls were using these methods to try and push this content in Pakistan, right? So trying to create some kind of a diplomatic influence, a diplomatic, impact, right? We all know the relationship between Pakistan and India is a tense one. And so, how really are they, they're interfering in this process? How will this be viewed on the part of both India and China? And how will that have recourse and impact on Pakistan's relationship with China and India? So this is one example that we've seen. Others we see very often that we primarily understand as election interference, right? We've seen this very prominently across all major continents, and particularly for looking specifically at Africa. Between 2017 and 2018, there were 9 major elections across sub-Saharan Africa that had, or actually not even sub-Saharan, all of the whole African continent, in which we've been able to document bots trying to specifically interfere in elections. Kenya, Lesotho, Equatorial Guinea, Senegal, Rwanda, Somalia, Egypt, and Angola. And specifically looking at Kenya, this election between Kenyatta and Odinga, there was a substantial amount of polarizing content that was being pushed out by these bot accounts. And they're coming from other countries. A lot of them are domestically based in Kenya, but a lot of them are from other surrounding African nations that are pushing out this content. So again, if it comes out that if the viewpoint is developed that one country is trying to influence this election in Kenya, it's not actually maybe as much of this population, it's these bots that still leads to potential some diplomatic strife between these countries, right? Or as diplomats who have to respond to this and say, it's not our country, it's not our citizens, right? It is these bots, or, it is this kind of malign effort to really impact these elections. And this was some data that was pulled on this Kenya election between Kenyatta and Odinga. As you can see here, it was social media accounts were very prominent in terms of who was driving most of the online discussion about this election. It was bots, right? So the 24% of all the online content that was coming about this election was coming from bot accounts, both based in Kenya and as well as other coming from other countries in Africa. And as we can see here, also social media was a key platform for polling, right? For what people were understanding and talking about, right? That gets back to environmental scanning and social listening and media monitoring. But these bots are highly active on social networking platforms today are where a lot of people are getting their information, having public discourse, talking about these issues. And so that becomes a prime platform for influencing people. So these bots are exactly where they need to be having an impact, right? And having repercussions on the election itself, or more broadly, diplomatic relations from these countries that are seen to be interfering in these elections. We've also seen basically interference in governance, right? So what we saw most recently in this coup d'etat in Mali, something that, you know, there's still a lot of research being done. So I imagine there's a lot of disinformation, or, you know, these bot efforts going around because it's so recent. We're still working on it. But one thing that we've seen is this picture specifically has started to go viral on, I believe, WhatsApp channels in Mali. And the issue is this picture, you know, basically the idea is the French government sent in troops and basically evacuated President Keïta out of Mali as the coup was beginning. In fact, that never happened. France has been involved since this has happened, but as you can see in this picture, this is actually Macron is sitting in the background right behind Keïta. This picture was taken in 2017 when Macron made a state visit to Mali, right? So it's telling a different story of these events, right? And so, you know, we have journalists and different organizations in Mali are trying to, you know, say this picture is real. It's an authentic picture, but this is from 3 years ago. This was not anything relevant to what's happened or is happening with this coup in Mali. So again, these are bots that are pushing these kind of things out and trying to create different narratives of what's going on and to push social issues. Another one that we've seen is they try and interfere in specific issues, right? Maybe not something that's about just an election or diplomatic relations, but they target very specific issues. The most prevalent one, which as I would largely imagine has impacted every single country on the planet right now, is the COVID-19 pandemic, right? This health issue. There has been so much disinformation, you know, here in the United States, Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, it's everywhere. And what are they doing? They're pressing partisan issues, right? They're trying to really put, not just pick at certain issues, but push the issues that there are already social divisions about, right? To create social unrest and, you know, potentially, you know, protests and maybe eventually riots. And so what we've seen a lot of content so far that fake news or, you know, these bot-based content that's come out about COVID-19, they're pushing things about like the status of the outbreak. Oh, you know, this is going to be gone in a month. No, we understand now that, you know, it's been at least 6 to 7 months since the pandemic started. You know, they were a lot of bots were trying to push out content in the early, you know, last March or April that this was going to be, this will be a couple weeks, right? No, this is going to be a much longer term thing, right? Economic issues. How is your country or maybe your receiving country been faring, right? In terms of your economic stability, right? Job security, and how, you know, the value of the currency in your country. How are these things have been faring in terms of the pandemic? The weaponization of the virus. One thing that we've seen very substantially, I'm not too familiar with, you know, maybe your regions, but very substantially in the United States is the idea that you know, the United States is currently in this tit for tat argument with China about who created the virus. Did it be, you know, was it developed naturally in China? Was it developed in a U.S. military, you know, facility as a weaponized virus? Right. We don't even know what's true anymore, right? Generally, the prevailing idea is this developed naturally from a wet market in China. But, you know, there's all these things, these conspiracy theories that are, they're already out there, but these bots are capitalizing on them, right? They're pushing out content that's really trying to convince people that these things are real and creating social divisions that not only do you think the specific way is real, but you think everyone else is lying to you about it, right? Oh, this is a conspiracy. You're all trying to convince us that it's not. This is what bots are doing to our political discourse. And they're doing it at the domestic level, but they're also doing it at the international level. And it's creating just significant amounts of reverb and backlash. So what are strategies for deterrence, right? How can we get around these? Some different things that we want to look at. Think about government agencies, right? What agencies in your governments are working toward these issues, right? Whether they're in your foreign ministry or other elements of the government. International organizations, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, or think tanks and academia. To break these down, one thing I do want to say is in my area of research, I'm a specialist in the United States and Europe. So most of my examples are based on my own research. So they come from a very European-centric model. Recognize, you know, there are likely things going on in your regions of the world that are also working. I'm just not overly familiar with them. So These are just ideas of things to look for in your area, your maybe your foreign ministry, your defense sector, your communication sector. These are just things that exist elsewhere, but they're good models of things that are working in this area right now. So in the United States, within the U.S. State Department, we have the Center for Global Engagement. They were originally set for kind of countering ISIS and ISIS groups. And since kind of ISIS has fallen off the wayside for the United States, it's been shifted toward computational propaganda, specifically looking at these state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. We also have the U.S. Cyber Command, based out of the Department of Defense, also works in these areas. So it's not just foreign ministry, right? It's how can you look across departments and across agencies about efforts that are being done. In France, we have the Center for Analysis, Policy, and Strategy, as well as the Institute for Strategy Research in the French Military Academy. So very often we see a lot of the leading efforts right now are coming from foreign ministries and the defense departments, or so those are typically good areas. There are more, but these are kind of the primary ones so far. In Sweden, they actually work a little bit less in the defense sector, and it's coming from their civil sector. The Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, they produced a document called Countering Influence Activities. It's basically a how-to manual for all civil servants in Sweden about how should they handle disinformation. When the public comes to their office about disinformation, how do they handle it? So it's more like a training manual. In Great Britain, we've seen a similar thing with the Government Communication Service. It's called Resist. It's the same thing. It's basically a training manual for government employees, civil servants as well as foreign diplomats, about how to understand it, how to see disinformation, and how to try and engage with it, counter it, convince the public of what is true and what is not true. And so these are just some snippets of these documents that have been produced. Resist is out of the British government. Countering Information Influence is out of the Swedish government, and this last one was the document out of the agencies I mentioned from France. So how do we understand these things, and how are your governments alone trying to tackle them? At the international and intergovernmental level, we also have, PAN groups, the European Center for Excellence of Countering Hybrid Threats. They were primarily working recently about the 2019 parliamentary elections, EU parliamentary elections. How can they basically established this rapid alert system. So if disinformation, a specific kind of disinformation or bot network was detected in one European country, that information was immediately shared with all EU member states so that they could watch basically for those kind of narratives coming out in their countries. The European External Action Service, they have a group called the East Stratcom Task Force that specifically tries to identify disinformation and counter it. NATO has a Strategic Communication Center. International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, that kind of comes back to, again, when they're specifically looking at elections. And then we also have more broadly looking at the United Nations, whether it's the UN Information Centers, which are stationed globally, or UNESCO's International Program for the Development of Communication, right? There are efforts that are popping up everywhere, right? This is an international problem. There's no country that's not affected. And so everyone is trying to develop task force or groups that are thinking about these things and trying to counter them. Again, this is not what, you don't need to devote yourself as a diplomat to these efforts. These are things to know that these are resources that are out there. Just look for them and, figure out how can they help you in your specific mission or your embassy or consulate's mission. Also, how can you work with the private sector, right? The internet is largely regulated by the private sector. Social media platforms are almost universally regulated or controlled by the private sector. We cannot control disinformation on platforms like Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, WeChat, WhatsApp. We cannot control disinformation on these platforms without collaboration with the private companies that control them, right? So how can we work with them? A perfect example, Denmark has established a diplomatic mission to Silicon Valley specifically, not to the United States, not to California or even the city of San Francisco, to the tech sector of Silicon Valley, right? I'm not advocating that your foreign ministries need to go and, establish an entire diplomatic mission for this purpose, but understand, reach out to these companies, right? They are looking to engage with, different countries and their foreign ministries about how can they work together for these areas. Brazil, or in I believe 18, we saw a lot of cooperation. In 2019, we saw a lot of cooperation between particularly Brazil and Mexico, with what Facebook established as an election war room. It was basically a 24-hour listening center that worked specifically to try and identify election disinformation and work with these countries on how to best counter it. So again, these can be long-lasting partnerships with the private sector, or they can be short ones, right? A specific election or a specific issue, event that's coming up with your country, receiving or sending. If you're interested in anything like that, it's not always easy to find who to reach out to. Specifically, if your missions would be interested in anything like this, these are the two probably best people to reach out to, with at least through Facebook and Twitter. Nathaniel Gleicher is head of cybersecurity at Facebook, and he deals primarily with he oversees these election war rooms and disinformation efforts. And Yoel Roth, similar, basically his counterpart at Twitter. How did they maintain the integrity of these content on these platforms? They are actively and eager to work with governments and members of foreign ministries on how to achieve these ends, right? So they're willing, if you have the interest, they're willing to work with you and establish partnerships with your specific missions, embassies, consulates, or your foreign ministries more broadly. Another good area in the private sector is work with the private communication sector. Look for international public relations firms or advertising firms or marketing firms. I say this because they are already listening for these things, right? They already have listening centers where they're doing social listening, media monitoring, and environmental scanning. They already have a vast system set up for it. So they're already doing it, right? Golan, it used to be Golan Harris, now it's called Golan. They call it the bridge. They basically have these listening centers stationed on major continents around the world. There are, I think, 1 or 2 in North America. I think they have 2 in Europe. I think they have three bridge centers based across Asia, East, Central, and Middle East. So they're already there listening, right? Doing these social listening and trying to identify this disinformation. They're absolutely open to working with, either specific missions, right? So if it's just your embassy, your consulate, or if your foreign ministry more broadly wants to reach out to them. Other ones are Edelman, Weber Shandwick, Burson. Used to be called Burson Marsteller. Now they recently acquired Cohen and Wolf, so it's Burson, Cohen and Wolf, right? But these are just ideas of, if you want to try and reach out to the private sector, these are also organizations you can look at to try and collaborate on effective communication specific to this kind of era of bots. There's also the nonprofit sector, right? You don't have to just think about, the government or the private sector. There's a lot of leeway or progress is being made in the nonprofit sector, because as we know, nonprofits and NGOs are not usually bound to as much federal regulation or red tape as governments or private sectors are. So they're a lot more fluid. Again, just a couple examples: Global Forum for Media Development, Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, Global Disinformation Index. There's a lot of these groups that are working on these things. And particularly for the nonprofits, they lack a lot of the insider knowledge or the financial resources to be highly effective. They need partnerships. So they're always looking for organizations to work with, right? Whether it's individual diplomats, consulates and embassies, or foreign ministries more broadly. They're looking for partnerships and they're eager for them. You also have think tanks and academia, and this is where I primarily fall in. A lot of groundbreaking research is being done, but we academics, we often live in a bubble, right? We need partnerships with you all, the practitioners, the people who are on the ground doing this, right? You see a lot of the things that we may not see in research, so we are always wanting to work with you. Couple of examples here, and for each of these, there's a lot more than what I have on these slides. These are just to kind of, ideas to get you thinking. The Atlantic Council, which is based in Washington, D.C., they have a specific task force called the Digital Forensics Research Lab, where they are primarily tracking disinformation. And they specialize actually not in the United States. They are very much specialized in places like Eastern Europe, parts of Africa, Central and Eastern Asia. So these are good places that are not overly Western-centric, right? They're based in the DC and maybe you're in London or something like that, but they are often very much centered more so on other regions of the world and the global south, or regions that we don't have as much of this information on. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, they recently established a partnership for countering influence operations. Same thing. They're a good place to get started if you're interested in anything like this, because they work with governments, they work with the private sector, and then they work with research intensive groups. So they, reaching out to one of these will open the door for you to a lot of these different sectors. And then there's always academia, just like, the Institute reached out to me about doing this kind of talk. Academics and scholars are very interested in doing this. We want to tell you what the things that we're learning, but we also want to hear from you and know what you need, right? As practicing diplomats, what do you need to know? We can work on that. What do you see, right? Help that inform our picture and understanding more broadly. So again, these are just some of the primary ones that are out there. Oxford has that computational propaganda project. They also have a digital diplomacy research group. Stanford has a lot in California, Cyber Policy Center, Global Digital Policy Incubator, Internet Observatory. But there's literally lists of hundreds, right? So don't think that, there's these few. There's so many out there, and there's definitely going to be some that are relative to your specific regions of the world and your countries. They're out there. You just need to find them. Kind of, just do some searching and looking. They're definitely out there, and they want to work with you. So those were the strategies, thinking about how, different ways you can try and groups you can work with to try and curb disinformation in these bot counts. But what are public policies, right? Thinking more on a legislative level or institutional policies you can establish. One, you want to think about multilateral data regulation. If we're working on the internet, right, and all these this disinformation comes from psychographic marketing, content curation, and micro-targeting content delivery. This comes from how data is collected from us and analyzed from us, right? Your Google search, your internet searches, your behavior on your social media platforms, all of that is informing this. How can your governments and your foreign ministries push for a regulation at the international level to try and have a better stakes at the regulatory level on data regulation? Increased algorithm oversight. Everything on the internet right now is driven by algorithms. How are algorithms working? And these largely are proprietary algorithms, right? Major companies, right, whether this is in India, in the United States, in Europe, these live behind trademarks and patents, right? Because they are the financial blood life of these companies. But that doesn't mean we can't have greater insight into what these algorithms are and how they work. So that's the way thinking about the kind of technological future of these things. They're very pertinent, right? How can you get your messages out? Well, part of that's going to come out to the algorithms that drive the delivery of your messages. Thinking about how can you try and identify these networks yourself, right? We've talked about not only how can you do social listening, but how can you find these bots specifically? This comes back down to more of a computer science background. So, if any of you have a computer science background or like your IT departments or the agencies, what they're going to be looking for, things like Sybil detection, social network analysis, and capacity building about these programs among countries. We need to build, organizations and institutions that have the necessary skills to do this, right? I'm not a computer science person. I don't speak, R, or I don't write code. So I'm limited to what I can do based off of what, computer science people can help me with. So building these skills a bit more broadly, understanding how can we identify bots, things like network integration, artificial inflation of followers, coordinated content, and then cursor movement and mouse mapping. There's all these really groundbreaking things that we can use to identify it. But it still exists in the very few realm of people who want, computer scientists who understand, computer scientists and engineers who understand this. So opening up our minds a bit more. No one, as a diplomat, no one told you your job is your responsibility is to know this stuff, right? And it's not your full responsibility, but the best way you can be proactive about it is to think about these things more broadly. Again, just understanding that whole broader picture. Cooperation and information sharing programs. I mentioned the EU set up this rapid alert system ahead of the 2019 parliamentary elections. We very often see bot accounts move, right? So in 2016, in the 2016 US presidential election, data that we've since been able to understand about it, there were these bots that were based in Israel. They were tweeting in Hebrew, and they were talking all about, Israeli settlements in Palestine. And then one day, like that, they automatically switched to talking about the US presidential election in English, right? Not even a gradual transition. They radically changed. if we can identify those bots and we can see when they make these changes, it gives us an idea of where disinformation is moving from. What issues are they jumping around from, right? So this idea is if one, for the EU elections, if one country was able to identify a disinformation topic or campaign, they shared that with all other EU member states so that then they could, if you see anything like this, right, this might be targeting your election or a similar narrative, or can you identify an entire network of bots that are pushing this, right? How are these bots jumping issues? Just sharing information, right, with other countries in your region, with your allies, your diplomatic partners, your receiving country. If you're seeing these things, how can you share that information? And then another thing is that what I'm really advocating for right now is we need to think about cybersecurity more broadly. Most of cybersecurity thinks about actual security of a network. Can someone hack into your network? Can they steal information? That's normally what we think about cybersecurity and how much of our policy is based around our legislative and national security policy. That's what it's about, making sure no one can hack into your emails, steal information, right? But in this age of the computational propaganda, we need to think about this more broadly in terms of social psychology, right? How are bots trying to affect your cognition, attitude, and behavior? And so adopting an idea of a policy perspective of cybersecurity that's a bit more broad than just, no one can hack into your network, because that doesn't help us, right? Computational propaganda, it's fully legal in all of our countries to buy advertisements, right, on these platforms and push out content. It's not illegal. So we need a bit more comprehensive policy, cybersecurity policy that can think about it. And that is all that I have to talk about. Thank you so much for your time. I know this is probably a bit of a long hour talking about some going all over the place. So again, thank you so much for your time. And, I'm more than happy to, hear your questions and talk about, your thoughts and anything you want to any thoughts you had about this presentation.
Thank you, sir, Dr. Philip, for your very kind and very comprehensive input. And certainly, as I am seeing some comments in chat box, people are very applauding, and my fellows are very appreciating your well-prepared lecture specifically on strategic communication. So we are truly grateful for your insights specifically on a very important, significant topic. So we have some short questions with your permission.
Yep, definitely.
Thank you. Madam Eman, you want to ask something? Please go ahead.
I can't hear you, Aman. Can anybody else hear her?
Eman, please, there is a distortion in your voice, please.
I know she's mobile.
Anyone else want to ask any question?
If you can put it, type it in the chat box, Aman, I'll get to it. I know this tech, we're the age of technology, and still even just basic, things like this can have just, fundamental issues. So.
And we have to live with it because it is new normal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's not going away anytime soon. I think Aman's typing up her question. Does anyone have another question in the meantime? I'm happy to.
Yeah, Nazia Noure, please go ahead. Nazia Noure, please introduce yourself and ask your question. Nazia Noure.
Hello, this is Nazia Nouri from Afghanistan. It was really new information and very informative. I just wanted to ask Mr. Philip that in Afghanistan, as you know, that the communication process from the top to the bottom is very weak, and I think cybersecurity is something that most of the diplomatic missions I think do not even care about. So what do you suggest for Afghanistan, a country like Afghanistan, as a basic thing, like for their communication process? What would you suggest for in the initial phase, that what we should do as a upcoming diplomats, or even as a person who is working in this area in a small organization? I'm also working for a German corporation.
Okay.
If you suggest something for us. it will be great.
Definitely. So you're absolutely right in that, even here in the United States, I'm advocating for these ideas about, a broader idea of cybersecurity. And no one wants to listen, right? Governments are always very slow, right? They just, they're bureaucracies that operate very slow, and they're slow to adopt things. So, even in the United States and, European countries that have very well established sectors and these things, they don't even want to adopt it. So you're not alone. Don't think it's just Pakistan or some of these other countries. It's a systemic problem. And the one thing I could say is continuously advocate for these issues, right? If you, I'm here, I believe in what I'm saying, and I'm telling all of you about it. But if it's something you truly believe in, you're the people on the ground. You see things that your superiors don't always see, right? Because they sit in the office and deal with more administrative stuff. You're the diplomats on the ground. You're the ones engaging with the public, or the publics in your areas or your stakeholders. You have the best knowledge of what the reality is, right? What the real situation is. And so you need to be advocates for whatever you think about, right? If you think this is necessary, it's just always, be continuously talking about it, right? Always be advocating for the purpose of it. Find other organizations that are using it, or other organizations that have made some progress, and try and use that as a model. Show your superiors or your institution that, this country or this diplomatic mission has done it. And look, it's been able to help them in this capacity, right? They've been able to subvert these kinds of issues or resolve these kinds of issues very quickly because they had something like this in place. Show the effectiveness of it. These things cost, they take time to establish, and they usually cost money. Everyone is strapped for money. Diplomacy is not, everyone in the diplomatic sector is strapped for finances. So one is find the ways that you can do it that are probably cheaper, or a bit easier. Start small, right? Don't go from we need nothing to like the biggest establishment ever. Start small, right? Work in increments and work your way up. That's the easy way to kind of sell it, is start small and work your way up. But another thing I would say is, as I mentioned, there's all these groups that are out there that are doing a lot of work. Partner with them, right? Try and convince your superiors. You don't have to do the work, right? You don't have to establish all this. There is this think tank. There is this nonprofit. There is this, academic research group at, this university that is doing this, and they're willing to do it, work with us, right? And do it largely for free. Because, like most of the time, we like this, I'm happy to do this, right? This is what my research area is. They're willing to work with you, and that removes the burden from your diploma, your mission, or your foreign ministry, or your government to have to, establish it, oversee it, administrate it, and fund it, right? So find these outside the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the academic sector, or think tanks. They're great organizations to partner with that can handle a lot of the workload, and are going to be very minimal on cost, or allocation of resources. So that's probably a good way to get started, and just can over time advocate it. And the biggest thing is if these are things you are passionate about, you think that you think these are legitimate concerns that you need to continue with over time. As you said, work your way up through your diplomatic process. As you become mid-level and senior level diplomats, you gain weight, right? You become more valued, and your opinion or your perspective becomes more valued. So if you continue to advocate for them over time, you're going to gain traction. It's not, unfortunately, an issue you're going to change. We're all going to change tomorrow. I wish it was, because that's, I think, what's necessary, but it's not the way politics and governance works. It's slow baby steps up the ladder. So that's what I would say. Just continue to be an advocate for these things that you think about or you think are worthwhile, and look for the partnerships that you can find out there outside of government, either inside government, but also outside government, that reduce the burden, right? Reduce the administrative or financial cost to your institution or organization.
So we have a question
Thank
from.
you so much.
Sure thing.
Okay. We have a question from Ayman Adnan. Could you please cite positive instances where bot accounts have been used for the greater good of the society?
Definitely. Let me think. Good accounts. They're definitely out there, right? So an example that's coming to mind is recently. It's since the COVID pandemic, Canada has been trying to basically figure out, like many other countries, right? There's all this disinformation flying around about COVID. What are the symptoms? how serious is it, vaccines, who's being vaccinated and who's not, and these things like this. The Canadian is actually the Canadian military. It was a special research group or special a member of the Canadian Intelligence Organization. They basically were collecting data on what were kind of the main polarizing issues that were present in Canada around these topics. And then they started buying content, right? They were buying paid advertisements to try and basically push out the disinformation elements, right? Some of this was true and some of it was not. And they started basically applying some of these bot networks, government created and government sponsored bot networks, to try and really thump out the disinformation, or the really polarizing ones, the ones that were going to be very, the ones that were advocating, violence and violent protests and riots, in Toronto or in Ottawa. So that's how it can be applied broad, in more positive contexts. I will say when it came out, and the Canadian public was not very happy about it, because the idea that, we're being watched and our government is, intentionally using, information in a way that, is not, they're pushing us in one direction. It was not well received, but there was a good intent to it, right? I don't want to make it sound like all of this content is bad. It can be used in positive and constructive ways. Mainly what we're worried about is the way other governments or foreign actors are trying to interfere in your abilities as to maintain either a functioning society or a functioning diplomatic relationship with your receiving country. So there are good instances, that it can be used for. That's one. I can't think of any other ones off the top of my head, but they're out there. I can definitely follow up if you're interested. Follow up, and I can find you. All doom and gloom, only bad. A recent study out of that research group at Oxford, they were able to document, I think, 72 or 73 countries around the world that are using these tactics. They're using paid, content online to push messaging, either to their domestic populations or abroad. So this isn't a thing where, at least from my perspective in the United States, we always hear about Russian disinformation or Iranian disinformation or North Korean, efforts. Over 1/3 of the countries around the world are using these tactics, right? This isn't just the 1 or 2 or 3 countries that we think about. This is broad, right? Turkey, the Philippines, multiple countries in Africa, Brazil, the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, right? All of the major players are using this, right? And it's very usable because, one, it's easy. It's not, it's easy to just go to this website and buy content. It's automated, so it's easy, but it's also cheap. If you to buy 1,000 impressions on a platform, it may cost like $20 US dollars, or $20 USD. Compare that to, in whatever your currency might be. It's a lot cheaper than other efforts, right? Military efforts or other intelligence efforts. It's surprisingly cost efficient. And so, countries are increasingly using it because it's just, it doesn't cost a lot, which, is part of the draw of it, is why it's so hard. It's so hard to find, and it's hard to find, and everyone's doing it because it's so cheap. So they not only can they do it, but they can buy a lot of content, right? And they can move it all around different parts of the world, different social networks. So, understand it's very broad ranging, right? It's over 1/3 of the countries around the world are using this for both positive and negative reasons. Does that answer your question, Iman? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Muhammad Siraj sir, please ask your question. Please introduce yourself before asking your question. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flip. It's been a really informative and interesting session. Really enjoyed. You mentioned very important points. I just wanted to find out about one of the things you said about academia. I belong to academia. My name is Muhammad Siraj. I'm from Pakistan, but I'm currently residing in Saudi Arabia, and I'm in academia. I'm in the field of teaching. So, how important is the role of the think tanks and academia is? You did talk about it, but can I request you to please be more specific about it?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, sir.
Definitely. So, for one example, that study I just mentioned by the University of Oxford Research Group, they did this study in 2018 where they were able to identify, they scraped data from the global Twitter data, and they were able to identify bots and then develop bot networks out of it, and then identify entire campaigns, right? What kind of content were they putting out? What issues were they targeting? They were able to write this up in a report where they did an academic report where they identified all of these 72 countries, but they also wrote individualized reports that they then provided to those countries. So they're providing, proof that these things are actually real, right? Some countries are not, they're like, do these even have an impact? They're trying to show countries what that impact is, what these campaigns look like, and teach them what they look like so they can see them in the future, right? If this is what they look like in the past, if we have any your next upcoming elections, this is what they're likely to look like. Also, they are, by understanding what they look like, you can develop strategies for how to, deterrence, right? How can you deter these accounts? How can you shut down these accounts? How can you correct the information? One of the hardest things we've discovered about disinformation is the way cognitive psychology, the way the human mind works. Once you believe something, it is incredibly hard to convince you that it's wrong, right? If it's disinformation, the human brain tends to believe the things that it's already accepted as true. So the trick with disinformation is not to tell people, oh, that's disinformation, it's wrong, don't believe it, right? They're already going to think it if they receive that message and accepted it. It's trying to deter it from the beginning. How can we shut down bot networks before they ever get information out to people? How can we identify these networks and counter the information, preempt the process, and get the correct information out there first? So the disinformation is what creates cognitive dissonance, if you will. These are all things that they can help with. On the think tank side, that digital forensics lab at the Atlantic Council, they're working in parts of the world that don't have as much established infrastructure to counter these efforts. So like one good example is Romania, or Eastern Europe, right? So like Romania and Belarus. There's been a lot of disinformation in the past couple of weeks around the Belarusian election with Lukashenko, but then also efforts to, the riots and the protests that we've seen since then. There's a lot of disinformation stemming from both inside the country, so bots inside the country, but also bots that are coming from elsewhere, primarily like Ukraine, Romania, Russia. And so the idea is, how can you see them? How can you address these issues in other languages? Because like sometimes, like we talked about the example with Go Back Modi, right? It was a third country that was intervening in this issue. Pakistan, these tweets that were coming out of Pakistan, right, were, Pakistan was not involved in this diplomatic issue, the instance between, India and China. So understanding the realm more broadly, what's coming, how can you deter them? How can you identify them? But then teaching people, right? So as I mentioned, I don't know all of your backgrounds, but I would imagine, as diplomats, not all of you, or probably few of you, if any, are formally trained in computer science, right? How to get on a computer and do a social network analysis to identify these bots yourself, right? How can you scrape your own, Twitter data to see what people are saying? Some of you might have those skills, but usually that's not something, is deemed pertinent that diplomats need to be trained in. So how can, they provide the resources to teach people as well, the software, how to use the software, how to actually write code to do these things. So there's a lot of different areas that they can apply these skills in. Prevention, deterrence, capacity building. I think that's the best way. And then, like I mentioned earlier to Iman, they carry the cost of burden, right? They will a lot of times do these things because they're already funded. They don't need your government to fund them for these efforts. So they're able to offer these things at low or no cost. So ways that can help out again, as I was telling Iman, the selling effort, right? Why should you convince your diplomatic institution they can be involved with this? And another reason is just like this debate, not debate, this lecture today, right? Raising ideas that you might not have been thinking about yet, right? These are things that are definitely out there, and as diplomats on the ground, you're definitely you're the people in the lead. You're in the shotgun experiencing this, but maybe there are things that you haven't thought about. Certain context of my lecture today, not all of you might have thought about, right? So introducing things to just be thinking about. If you're thinking about it, you're aware, and then you might be able to see it more wholly in your practice, in your daily lives or your daily jobs. Does that answer your question?
That's right, sir. It does certainly. I'm sure there's a lot to talk, and if we ever have an opportunity to really communicate, I'll appreciate if you could forward your contact email this chat.
Yeah, and I will
Thank you
say
very much.
I put my contact information in the PowerPoint. I am going to provide it to the Institute if they want to distribute it. So, any of you please feel more than welcome to reach out to me by my university email, which is listed there, or Twitter or something. Reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk more, with any of you about any of these things.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips.
Dr. Philip, do we have time to take another question from?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Ali Sheikh, please ask your question. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Ali Sheikh. I'm First Secretary, Somali Embassy in Islamabad. I wanted to thank the institution arranged this very valuable Dr. Philip. It's very, very good lecture. Thank you very much, Dr. Philip. The detailed way, and also just thank you very much. It's very wonderful. I have a question about the election interferences in 2017-18. You referred countries: Kenya, Lesotho, Equatorial Guinea, Senegal, Rwanda, Somaliland, Egypt, and Angola. You mean Somaliland, Somalia?
I'm sorry?
You referred countries in the elections, interference elections in 2017.
Yes.
So the countries you referred are Lesotho, Kenya, Equatorial Guinea, Senegal, Rwanda, Somaliland, Egypt, and Angola. So my question is, do you mean Somaliland, Somalia?
Probably. So as I mentioned, I'm a U.S. and Europe expert. That's my primary area. Understanding, I was given an overview of the where most of you are from, Central Asia and Africa. So I tried to pull in examples that were relevant. That's research that I pulled. So I can double check it and definitely get back to you. But that was what I had pulled from the research.
I'm sorry to bother you, Doctor.
Oh, no.
Do you know all these are countries, but Somaliland, it's a part of Somalia. Somalia was colonized, northern Somaliland, and the southern British, Italian Somaliland.
Okay.
So this is, but the whole are Somalia. So please review this. Thank you very much.
I'll double check it. I can get back with you. It could have been a local election in Somaliland, or it could have been a national election in the greater Somalia. I can look into that and get back to you on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I had not caught that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have another question from Mr. Abdurrahman from Kenya. Mr. Abdurrahman, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Philip, for your wonderful expose. As you've put it, I think most of us are not privy or maybe IT experts. But generally, the way you have put it, at least for every even layman to understand what is really going on. Maybe mine is just to agree with you, is a comment that, of course, currently as we are no longer in the traditional diplomatic, practice, because we have also the digital diplomacy that's taken over. Because as much as diplomacy is about engaging and trying to project your images on traditional basis, but currently the social media has taken over, and most of the information, sometimes you find them in the public domain, and they don't even originate from the diplomats per se, but the public participation. Through public participation, they try to project images and informations, and even make it difficult, as you have put it, for the diplomats to engage in the day-to-day work happenings that are happening back in your country. Some of them that are not even the actual happening, but maybe exaggerated issues through, as you said, bot accounts, are the ones that project, of course, in the public domain, and it makes it difficult for you to try to engage in all this. I will maybe put it this way, that since this is now in the common practice and in the public domain, and it's a powerful tool, and as you always say, information is power, and most of the developing countries where I come from, Kenya being part of them, then you find that we are disadvantaged in one way. And from the way things are going in terms of interferences in affairs of other countries. You put it issues of elections interfering, or even through fake media propaganda. So the countries, and I'll see this. Will I be right to say maybe this could be a future front of war that the modern the countries will use, other than even the physical war or whatever that you've put it? It's a cheaper way of trying to engage, either through misinformation, disinformation, or propaganda. Just try to undermine other countries through fake news. You've seen the likes of the Arab uprising through social media and everything. The media is, the public is appraised, and either through negative or positive, fake information, then uprisings come about, maybe to even overthrow existing legitimate government. Mm-hmm. So can we say this is a modern tool that can be used by the nations that are in use or are in control of these tools, to the detriment of those poor countries that are not able to defend themselves, or to counter, or to issue rebuttals, for that matter, to give the correct images? And have you also, as you've rightly put it, once information has been put in the public domain, it's very difficult for it to be, even by the time you issue rebuttals, it might be too late. And you've well explained it, that the human mind is, the first information always takes precedence. So do you think it will be a tool that could be used by, these powerful countries, as they try also to be in tug of war between each other, also try to undermine other poor countries, to influence even governance in those countries? And if they don't have the resources to try to invest in this, then it will be too bad for them, or too difficult for them to survive the current, as it were, in modern world. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. This is a new era of information warfare, right? And that's why I mentioned a little bit about cybersecurity. But this is not just network hacking. This is another area of kind of information warfare. And so I think that not every context, like I mentioned to Iman, there are some positive contexts of how you can use bots, potentially, but there's a lot of negatives. And so this is a way that countries are trying to impact other countries, right? Revisionist countries, or countries that want to impact another one that might not have the resources. This is a very cheap mode that they can do it. And so, and they will, right? It's easy. All they need to do is buy so many impressions or retweets or shares or anything. And as you mentioned, it can be targeted at countries that don't have reciprocal resources to respond, right? So it is a struggle, especially if you're coming from that country trying to figure out how to get around it. The one thing I would say is this is cheap for these actors, right? This is cheap for a country, but it also means it's cheap for that country that needs to respond. So the countries that don't have very established communication systems, or don't have lots of resources to be able to establish these massive networks to respond to this, or proactively, you can also still engage in, make use of these same cheap platforms, these low cost platforms, to try and get your message out before. And that's when you rely on the kind of beginning half of my message, the beginning half of my PowerPoint, strategic communication, effective public relations, marketing, and advertising. If you're talking daily from your diplomatic mission, or to relate to Nazia's question about as an individual diplomat with your own social media accounts, if you're on a regular basis, being a good ambassador, and I use ambassador loosely, a good representative of your brand, of your nation, of your embassy, of your foreign ministry, if you do that consistently, you build up a credibility over time. And so using these things on your own platforms, if you're doing that on a regular basis, that makes catching up with this disinformation and this propaganda an easier task, because you already have a presence, right? You already have a relationship with your Twitter followers, or your whatever platform you're on, your foreign audience in your receiving country. You already have somewhat of a relationship and a rapport with them. An example I can give you on that front is the Israeli Foreign Ministry is incredibly proactive about reaching out to foreign publics in the Arab world. So Israeli diplomats, are very often engaged on platforms like Twitter, is the main one I'm thinking of, but other platforms, with Arab populations in Saudi Arabia, and most recently the United Arab Emirates, right? they're not even waiting for the idea of propaganda to come around and impact a negative relationship or a negative image. They're proactively always trying to improve that image. For the, it comes back to their outcomes, their interest of trying to improve Israeli-Saudi relations, improve Israeli, UAE relations or something. So it's about using the same kind of economic and resource benefits that that facilitate bots in the first place. But also, if you're doing this on a regular basis, before these crises or these disinformation campaigns pop up in your specific area, backyard of your diplomatic mission, that just helps build a presence and credibility in a relationship with your audience, that they're automatically going to be more prone to engage or believe what you have to say, rather than these bots that they've never heard of,
If we have Ma'am Farid Asaf with us. Ma'am, welcome, and over to you, please.
Thank you so much. And this was, I was so forward looking to this class for so many days since I, interacted with Dr. Philip. Thank you so much for your presence. And I was, as you must be talking about the communications and relationship building and, I hope that you all have an amazing class with Dr. Philip. But the one problem that keeps you, disconnected is because in my area where I am living right now in Islamabad, only 2 kilometers, the entire area was, there was signals stopped by the authorities because there was mullahs on the roads demanding something happen in France because of the Charlie Hebdo caricatures or something like that. So they were demanding that, and because of that, I could not be in the class. So this is something, another big challenge for people like me who wants to be in the class, but communicate with other people and giving the message across can also face these kind of challenges as well. But I hope that you all have a wonderful conversation with Dr. Philip. I hope that you had wonderful experience with people. I just received my signals back, and it is almost end of the class. I hope that I can't say anything about the entire experience yet, but I will be looking at the recordings, which will be for the economic purposes. Most of the class, I guess that the number of presence in the class is also less because of this signals across Islamabad as well, and few of the and I hope that everybody liked it. Dr. Philip will also be sharing his presentation. I'll be sharing that as well. Philip, if you will also be sharing anything that you think as a text, academic, or anything that you think that is good for the diplomats and people who are sitting around with us in the class, for them it's good to read about the subject that you teach as well. Mm-hmm. And of course your own writings. I'll be sharing also your Twitter handle with the students as well, so that they can follow you, they'll be in touch with you as well. So this is what I can say right now, because it's such an amazing experience. Thank you so much also for taking the time out. It's way in the morning right now in your part of the world, but
it's not too early though.
Not too early. You must have your big cup of coffee, I guess.
I actually don't drink coffee, so I've never been a coffee drinker, so I'm just a morning person. I love getting up early, so it worked itself out.
Wonderful. That's the plus for us. That's a plus for us.
Yes.
We'll continue inviting you in our class. I think that is a wonderful experience. I hope that we'll continue our conversation. I was sharing with Kashif that strategic communication is what I love most about, because this is my subject of interest and research and work as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Philip, for your presence. And I hope that you had a wonderful conversation with the students. And I hope those people who are around, you also have the wonderful experience. We'll be seeing you on Friday again, everybody, for another wonderful class. Dr. Nadia Elme will be joining us from Egypt. She will be here in class. She is expert on China. And then we have a wonderful diplomat, Pakistani diplomat from Kenya, will be joining us in our next class on Friday. So Philip, you must have seen our class. We are doing it with Rifa International University, Rifa Institute. Kashif, thank you so much for your last minute support as well. Thank you so much for your support. Technically, I mean, you must have, everybody has enjoyed the class. Thank you so much, Dr. Philip. Let's end the class, and thank you everybody. If you want to say anything last, it's up to you.
Yeah, please, Dr. Philip, please, if you want to say something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was early for me, but I know it's the end of a day for all of you. So I appreciate, the last thing anyone probably wants to do is sit in a long lecture on a late Friday night or Friday afternoon. So thank you all for appeasing me as well, because I know, an hour-long lecture is not the funnest thing to just sit through. So thank you for your time. And again, please feel more than welcome to reach out to me. My email and Twitter handles will be on the PowerPoint that I'm going to send out to Farhat to give to all of you. And I'll send some resources, but like I said, make use of me, but there's so many resources out there. I've listed some on my PowerPoint, but I'm more than happy to give you much more. Just reach out, let's have a conversation, a dialogue, and more than happy to help out however I can.
Wonderful. Brilliant, everybody. Have a wonderful day, Dr. Philip, and a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.